Welcome to today's story. If you're new to the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a comment with your thoughts below. Your feedback really helps us create more content for you. This is a story about betrayal, trust, and the painful decisions we sometimes have to make. For years, I believed I was in a happy, stable marriage with the woman I loved. We had been together for over 2 decades, building a life, a family, and a future. But one day, while cleaning out the attic, I stumbled upon something that would shatter everything I knew about my wife and our relationship. It was an old diary she had kept when we were first dating. As I flipped through the pages, I read things that left me speechless. My wife had been cheating on me before we even got married. The betrayal hit hard not just because it was recent, but because it was during the most critical time in our lives. At that moment, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. To make matters worse, I discovered that the person she had been involved with was someone I knew. Close friend. How could she hide something like this from me for so long? It was a gut-wrenching realization that would haunt me for months to come. The next step would be one of the hardest decisions I had ever made. Stay with someone who had betrayed me before we even committed our lives to one another, or leave and take back control of my future. This was the beginning of a journey I never thought I would have to take. Make sure to stay tuned for the next part of the story, and don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. After discovering the truth in my wife's old diary, I was torn between confronting her right away or processing everything on my own. But I couldn't shake the anger and confusion. The betrayal was too much to ignore. I had to know why. Why she would hide something so crucial, something that could have easily come out during our dating years. I confronted her that evening after the kids were asleep. My heart was racing as I walked up to her, knowing I had to ask the hardest questions of my life. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She froze. I could see the guilt in her eyes. It was like a veil had been lifted, and I could see the truth of who she was. After a long pause, she whispered, "I was scared. I thought it was just a phase, something we could forget." But I couldn't forget. How could I, after everything we had built together? I had trusted her completely. My mind raced. I wanted answers. I wanted to understand how she could betray me for so long without a second thought. She apologized, but her words felt empty. The trust was gone, shattered beyond repair. The hardest part wasn't the confession. It was the realization that I had spent years building a life with someone who wasn't honest with me from the start. The woman I thought I knew was someone else entirely. I spent the next few days in a haze. My mind was overwhelmed with what I had learned, and the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I couldn't continue this marriage. It wasn't just the affair during our dating years. It was the pattern of deceit that I could no longer ignore. I had spent the better part of 2 decades believing in a relationship that had started on a lie. The weight of that truth was unbearable. But the question remained, how do I walk away from the life I had built with her? How do I leave someone who, despite everything, was still the mother of my children? The days following our confrontation felt like a blur. It wasn't just about her affair anymore. It was about everything that had led to this point. The lies, the missed opportunities for honesty, the growing distance between us. I was left with nothing but questions and a sense of betrayal that I couldn't shake. The most painful part was realizing that my trust had been so easily broken. I had always believed that the foundation of our marriage was strong. We had built a home, raised children, and shared dreams. I thought I had a partner who would stand by me through thick and thin. But now that illusion had shattered. My mind raced through all the possibilities. Could I forgive her? Could I move on, pretending like everything was fine? I wanted to believe that I could work through it, that somehow we could rebuild our marriage. But deep down I knew that I couldn't. She had deceived me before we even got married. That was the foundation upon which everything else had been built. How could I trust her again? How could I continue a life with someone who had been hiding such a significant part of their past? The truth hit me hard. This wasn't just about her affair. It was about the lies and the deceit that had lingered unspoken between us for so long. It wasn't an easy decision to make, but I knew I had to leave. I had to walk away not just for me but for our children too. They deserved honesty, stability, and a home where they weren't caught in the middle of a toxic relationship. The hardest part of all was thinking about the future. How would this affect our kids? How would they cope with the idea of their parents being apart after 20 years? The guilt of that was overwhelming. But despite all the pain, the anger, and the guilt, I knew it was the right decision. I couldn't continue living in a relationship based on a lie. The truth had come out, and I had to face it head-on, no matter how difficult it was. After making the decision to leave, the hardest part was facing the unknown. I had no idea what life would be like without her by my side. For 20 years we had been a team, raising children, building memories, and sharing our lives. Now I was on my own, navigating through the wreckage of my past and trying to rebuild something for my future. The first few weeks were the hardest. I felt the weight of the empty house, the absence of her presence. Even though she had betrayed me, there were still moments when I missed the person I thought she was. I missed the conversations, the shared laughter, and even the small things like watching TV together or cooking dinner as a family. But I had to remind myself that those moments weren't real anymore. The person I had loved was gone, replaced by someone who had chosen to deceive me. And that was something I couldn't ignore. The toughest part was the emotional toll. There were days when I felt defeated, like I would never be able to move on. But then I'd remember my children, and I'd push forward. They needed me to be strong. I had to show them that no matter what, they could overcome any challenge. At first, the thought of dating or even trusting someone again seemed impossible. How could I? I had been betrayed by the person I trusted most. The idea of opening myself up again to someone else felt like a distant dream. But as time went on, I started focusing on myself. I spent more time with friends and family, people who had always been there for me. I worked on my personal growth, rediscovered hobbies I had long forgotten, and took the time to heal. Slowly, I began to find joy in the little things again, like watching the sunrise with my kids, or just taking a walk without the weight of betrayal hanging over me. And as for her, she was still trying to hold on to our past, but the damage had been done. She wanted to talk, to work things out, but I had nothing left to say. I had already made up my mind. By now, I had realized something crucial. I was stronger than I thought. I had survived betrayal, and I was rebuilding my life on my terms. And no matter how difficult it was, I was ready to embrace the future. As I moved further away from the heartache, I began to focus on rebuilding not just my life but also my sense of self. I had spent 20 years as part of a couple, defining myself through my marriage and family. But in the wake of everything, I realized that I had lost touch with who I was before all of this. The person I had become was so entangled in the life we had built together that I didn't recognize the man staring back at me in the mirror. I started doing things I hadn't done in years, going to the gym, reading books I had once loved, and reconnecting with friends I hadn't seen in too long. I even picked up old hobbies like painting that had once brought me so much joy. Every day felt like a small victory, a step towards reclaiming my happiness. I realized that I didn't need anyone to define my worth. The pain of betrayal had humbled me, but it had also taught me a valuable lesson. My happiness depended on me, and not on the approval or actions of others. Meanwhile, she tried to reach out more often. There were moments when she seemed genuinely remorseful, but I could never forget the betrayal. I refused to let her back into my life, not because I didn't care, but because I needed to protect myself and my peace. It was difficult, but I had to do what was best for me and my future. I also began to see the importance of focusing on my children. They were my priority now, and while the divorce was hard on them, they also saw me taking control of my life. I could see them slowly healing too, understanding that they didn't have to accept betrayal or toxic behavior in relationships. They learned that self-respect and trust were essential in any bond, and I hoped they carried that with them as they grew. Slowly I began to date again. It wasn't about rushing into a new relationship, but rather about finding someone who respected me, who could match the growth and strength I had achieved over the past year. I wasn't looking for someone to replace what I had with my ex-wife, but someone who could add a new layer of joy to my life. As the months passed, I became more at peace with my past. The The scars would always be there, but they no longer defined me. I had overcome something I never thought I could, and I was proud of the man I had become. As I continued to rebuild my life, I learned that healing wasn't just about moving on. It was also about forgiving. Now, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened, nor does it mean I had to let my ex-wife back into my life. Forgiveness, for me, was more about freeing myself from the anger and bitterness that had weighed me down for so long. I realized that holding on to resentment only gave power to the past, and I didn't want that anymore. I wanted to be in control of my own emotions, not be a prisoner of the hurt I had experienced. Letting go of that anger was difficult, but it was incredibly freeing. It allowed me to take full responsibility for my future and my happiness, without letting my past mistakes and betrayals dictate who I would become. I also had to forgive myself. For a long time, I blamed myself for not seeing the signs, for staying in a marriage that wasn't healthy, and for trusting someone who didn't value me. But with time, I realized that no one could have predicted what would happen, and that I had done the best I could with what I knew at the time. I needed to stop blaming myself for her actions, and instead, focus on becoming a better version of myself. The most difficult thing I had to come to terms with was the idea of trust. I had trusted my ex-wife with everything. My heart, my life, my family, and she had betrayed that trust. It was a hard pill to swallow, but I realized that trust could be rebuilt, not in the same relationship, but in new ones. Whether it was with friends, family, or even a potential future partner, I knew that trust would come back slowly, and it would require time and consistency. As time went on, I began to feel lighter. The weight of the past had been lifted. I had my moments of doubt and sadness, but they no longer defined my days. Instead, I embraced the freedom that came with starting over. I looked forward to the future with optimism, knowing that I had learned valuable lessons about love, trust, and self-worth. In the end, my journey wasn't just about healing from betrayal. It was about discovering who I really was, without the influence of anyone else's actions. I had become stronger, wiser, and more self-aware. I had learned the importance of self-love and respect, and I vowed to never settle for anything less than what I truly deserved. And as for my ex-wife, well, I learned that some people are not meant to stay in your life forever. She was a chapter in my story, but I was the one who held the pen. The future was mine to write. Thank you so much for following along with this journey. I appreciate each of your comments and your support. I hope my story gives you strength and encourages you to move forward, no matter what challenges you face.